And you'll of course remember back to the first module of this course when we talked about those key evolutionary milestones in evolutionary biology. Tiktaalik represents that key transition from water to land. So moving on, up first for our modern amphibians, we have the order Urodela, or when I learned it in college, it was called Chordata. These are our salamanders. They are amphibians that are probably most similar to ancestral amphibians. So they're in some ways sort of living relics of some of the first amphibians that arose. There's about 620 different species alive today. Some of these species are entirely aquatic, some of them are terrestrial, and some of them have that dual lifestyle of spending part of their time in the water and part of their time on land. Most adult salamanders have a generalized tetrapod body plan with 4 limbs and a tail. And the placement of their legs, it actually makes it difficult for them to locomote. Okay, so if you ever watch a salamander walk, they do this thing called lateral undulation, which means that at any point in time, 3 of their appendages are on the ground. And this is how they walk, like this. So they move like this. The majority of salamanders actually don't have lungs and respiration occurs through their skin. And so that's why it's extremely important to keep their skin moist and healthy and free of bacteria and fungus. Next, we have the order Anura. This contains our frogs and also the toads, which are a specific family within the Anura called the Bufonidae. Okay, the frogs, the Anurans, represent the most diverse group of vertebrates on Earth. They have nearly 6,000 species and a global distribution. So our Anuran friends are found everywhere on Earth except for Antarctica. Here's a cute picture of an Australian green tree frog. Frog eggs are externally fertilized. So if you remember back to our animal reproduction lecture, we talked about internal and external fertilization. The frogs perform external fertilization. And in order to keep those eggs moist and healthy, they produce this thick jelly layer that allow the embryo to grow and develop while being protected in a moist aquatic environment. Next, let's talk about the Anuran life cycle. The life cycle of most frogs, as other amphibians, consists of 2 distinct stages. The larval stage followed by metamorphosis to an adult stage. The larval stage of a frog is the tadpole, of course, and it's often a filter-feeding herbivore, which is different from the adult stage. As a tadpole, they usually have gills, a lateral line system, long-finned tails, and they don't have any defined limbs yet. They metamorphose into an adult, of course. At this stage, they lose their gills, they lose their tail, it becomes shorter and shorter. Their lateral line system goes away, and then they develop their 4 distinct limbs. They also develop this stronger, more defined jaw, and their digestive system transformed into the typical short gut of a predator. They also develop eardrums and they develop their air-breathing lungs. Next, let's talk about the order Apoda. You can guess, if you understand what A means and what Poda means, that these are creatures without feet. And so we call them the Sicilians. They lack limbs. We can find these creepy things in soils in tropical areas, and they can actually be mistaken superficially for earthworms because they do sort of look like segmented earthworms, but they're not. They are vertebrates. They are amphibians. They are, oddly enough, tetrapods, even though they have lost all of their limbs. And weirdly enough, they're also blind. They're almost nearly blind. So very, very strange little creatures that are adapted for burrowing in soil, and therefore they don't need limbs and they don't really need to see. So they're perfectly suited to their environment. All right, moving on now, we're going to talk about the amniotes. Okay, these are organisms, these are animals with amniotic eggs. Okay, They are distinguished from amphibians by their terrestrially adapted eggs. First, we'll talk about what the amniotic egg is, and then we'll talk about the different groups that are called amniotes. So the amniotic egg is supported by 4 extra embryonic membranes. We have the yolk sac, we have the amnion, we have the chiron, and finally we have the allantois. Okay. In amniotes that lay eggs, the shell of the egg provides protection for the developing embryo while being permeable enough to allow the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. But in mammals, the yolk sac is very, very reduced, but we still have that embryo that's being cushioned and enclosed within the amnion here. Okay. And interestingly enough, the placenta is derived from the chorion and the allantois here. Okay. So all of the amniotes have these distinguishing characteristics. So first, let's talk about the yolk sac. Blood vessels in the yolk sac transport yolk nutrients to the circulatory system of the embryo. Then we have the chiron, which facilitates the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the embryo and the egg's external environment. The allantois stores waste that's produced by the embryo and facilitates respiration. So that's this here. And finally, the amnion protects the embryo from mechanical shock, so being jostled around, it's kind of like a shock absorber, and it supports hydration of the embryo. So we had the emergence of the amniotes about 340 million years ago. After they arose, we had a quick divergence into different groups. And these different groups are characterized by the number of holes in their head. We call these holes fenestrae, which is another word for window. And these fenestrae are post-orbital openings. Okay, what I mean by that is if you take a look at the skull here, we have the orbital hole where the eyeballs go. And then anything behind that is post-orbital. Okay, so in an anapsid skull does not have any openings. Therefore, it is without fenestrae, and we call it anapsid. Our synapsid skulls have one fenestral opening, one post-orbital hole. We call it synapsid. And then finally, our diapsid skulls have 2 post-orbital fenestrae, 2 openings past the eye opening. Okay, so these holes define the different subgroups of our amniotes. So first up are anapsids. These include extinct organisms, and they traditionally included the turtles, but we have more recent molecular and fossil evidence that shows that turtles actually arose within the diapsid line, and then they lost their post-orbital fenestrae. So turtles are a little bit of a weird case, but most of the other subdivisions are easily distinguishable. Our synapsid organisms are all of the mammals, okay? But for now, let's talk about the diapsid organisms. These diapsid organisms contain our dinosaurs, our birds, and all other extinct and living reptiles. So let's break this down, focusing in just on the diapsids. We have 2 groups that stemmed off within the diapsids. We have the Archosauromorpha and the Lepidosauromorpha, our archosaurs and our lepidosaurs. The lepidosaurs include modern lizards and snakes, which we called squamates. It also includes our turotaras. And we'll talk about what each of those are in the coming slides. And our archosaurs include modern crocodiles, as well as our pterosaurs, our Ornithian dinosaurs, our Saurischian dinosaurs, and our birds. So let's delve deeper into the class Reptilia and how they fit into all of this. So reptiles originated about 300 million years ago during the Carboniferous. They are one of the oldest known amniotes, And they had both amphibian and reptilian characteristics when they first came on the scene. So as mentioned previously, we have both archosaurs and lepidosaurs that are represented in our reptiles. These are, of course, considered to be tetrapods. They live on land, and one of the key adaptations to living on land was developing this protective scaly skin, which protects against water loss. This also means that, unlike our amphibians, our reptiles can't breathe through their skin, which means that they had to evolve lungs. And as we'll talk about in the coming slides, there are 4 living groups or clades of the class Reptilia. But first, let's talk about the extinct clades. First, we have the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are archosaurs. We also have within this group the pterosaurs as well. Dinosaurs mean fearfully great lizard, okay? And we have 2 subdivisions within the dinosaurs. We have the lizard-hipped dinosaurs and the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Oddly enough, our birds, they are descendant of dinosaurs, but the birds are not descendant from our ornithians. They're developed from the Saurischian dinosaurs, the lizard-hipped dinosaurs. We have a video for you to watch that explains the different hip architecture for the basis of these different divisions of our dinosaurs. But now let's jump into the modern living representatives of reptiles. We have first up order Crocodilia. Crocodile means small lizard. Okay, this arose as a distinct lineage by the middle of the Triassic, and it includes our alligators, our crocodiles, our gharials, and our caimans. Next, we have the Rhinocephala order. Rhinocephala literally means beakhead, and this is the Tuatara. Oddly enough, there's only one living species of the Rhinocephala, and that's this guy, the Sphenodon punctatus. Poor guy. He's all alone on New Zealand. He's the only living extant member of this order. Next, we have the Squamata. Squamata means scaly, and this is the order that contains all of our living lizards and snakes. And most lizards differ from snakes by having 4 limbs, although these have often been lost or reduced in at least 60 different lineages. So there are representatives in the lizards that don't have legs. And we're not going to get into that, but it's just extremely fascinating that not only did our snakes lose their legs, but also there are some lizards that lost their legs as well. But remember, even though snakes don't have legs right now, they're still considered tetrapods. Then finally, we have the order Testudines, which means having a shell. These are our turtles, our terrapins, and our tortoises. We're going to leap into the birds. Notice that their closest relatives are dinosaurs, and if you follow this dendrogram, they are dinosaurs. So birds used to be of this class called aves, but they're actually now within the class Reptilia. They're in the Dinosaura clade, and obviously clearly very ferocious and fierce like dinosaurs. Birds, unlike other reptiles, are endothermic. And reptiles are mostly exothermic, meaning they have to obtain their heat from the outside environment, but birds have a better way to regulate their internal body temperature. They are endotherms, but specifically we call them homeotherms because they are usually able to maintain their body temperature at an elevated and constant temperature, significantly above the average body temperature of most mammals. They need to do this because the act of flight is extremely strenuous, and so hovering especially, they have to expend lots and lots of energy, which in turn necessitates a high metabolic rate. So our birds are homeothermic. They also have eggs with a calcium carbonate coating on the outside. They also have the special feature of feathers. We're going to talk about feathers on the next slide. Feathers are modified scales. So believe it or not, what is a scale in a reptile or the dinosaurs is a feather in the birds. And birds, modern birds, produce two main types of feathers. They have contour feathers and they have down feathers. Contour feathers have a number of parallel barbs that allow the feather to interlock, and these barbs stem off a central shaft here. They also have primary feathers and secondary feathers. The primary feathers are located at the tip of the wing and they provide thrust, while the secondary feathers are located closer to the body of the bird and they are providing lift to the bird. So a very large question in evolutionary biology is, when did this transition from reptile to bird happen? And for a while, we didn't really have any strong clues until we found amazing new fossil evidence in China. This is the famous Archaeopteryx fossil that represents the key transition between dinosaur and bird. And it has, in the fossil itself, different features that harken it back to a dinosaur, but also could be related to a bird as well. So specifically talking about dinosaur features, we have a jaw with teeth and a long bony tail. Okay, so those are the features of the Archaeopteryx that make it seem like a dinosaur. But then we have this key distinct feature of a bird-like creature with feathers that are specifically modified for flight. And while we don't know exactly what this animal looked like, there have been artist depictions to guess at what it looked like while it was living. So Archaeopteryx was probably living around 200 to 145 million years ago. And that's all well and good, but still a standing question is, how did flight originate? And there were a number of hypotheses going around when I was in college. Was it from the treetops down, or did it arise from a ground-dwelling organism going up? And I found this incredible video where a scientist tackles that exact question with new 21st century methods to understand the origin of flight and the utility of half of a wing. So I encourage you to watch this TED Ed video to watch the scientists experiment. Going back now to our dendrogram of chordates and vertebrates, we have now reached the bottom where we have our mammals. Now, if you remember back to the slide that discussed the evolution of the amniotes, we were talking about the different fenestrae or post-orbital openings. And remember that the synapsids, the animals that have one post-orbital opening, those are all of our mammals. So let's talk about the mammals. Well, they are extremely diverse. They are all synapsids, as we just mentioned. They are tetrapods and they are amniotes. Interestingly, even though we have a great diversity of mammals on our planet, we can sift them into 3 living clades. But first, let's talk about the characteristics that define the mammals. First, we have the most notable characteristic of hair. Hair is made out of a protein called keratin, and it is one of the most obvious characteristics of our mammals that we have hair, and we also have whiskers. Now, there are some species of mammals that do not have conspicuous hair, like whales, for example, but hair has many important different functions for mammals. As you know, mammals are endothermic, and hair helps to trap a boundary layer of air close to the body, retaining heat that's generated by our metabolic activity. Along with insulation, hair can also serve as a sensory mechanism with things like whiskers, also called vibrissae. Vibrissae are attached to nerve structures on the skin that transmit information about tactile vibration as well as sound. In addition to insulation and the vibrissae, we can also use hair for signaling, not only with colors, but also, if you're familiar with an angry dog, or even you, when hair stands up on the back of your neck, this is a mechanism to appear larger. In addition to hair, another notable characteristic of the mammals are, of course, the mammary glands. Mammary glands, of course, is where the mammals get their name from, and these are specially adapted glands that produce milk for young. They may look like your typical nipple structure, or as we'll talk about with the monotremes, they produce milk from their skin directly, and they kind of sweat it out. So that's a little creepy, but moving on, most of our mammals have these specialized ear bones that we've already talked about in previous lectures. So we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes that are adapted in mammals to serve functions for hearing, while in our reptile friends, they serve function in the jaw. But in addition to these special ear bones, we have another specialized skeletal structure in our teeth. Specifically, we as mammals are characterized as having heterodont teeth. What this means is that we have different types of teeth serving different functions. So we have different types and shapes of teeth, like our incisors, our canines, our premolars, and our molars, instead of just one type and shape of tooth. In addition to the condition of being heterodont, a lot of us are also diphyodonts, which means that during our lifetime, we have two sets of teeth. One set early in our development and another set later in our development. We have baby teeth early in our life, and then those get replaced with permanent teeth. Okay, so having those two sets of teeth is characterized by this condition here. Talking about the evolution and the rise of mammals, you'll remember, of course, that mammals are synapsids. We are the only living representatives of the synapsids. Most of the early synapsids actually went extinct during the Jurassic period. So mammals are the only extant or living clade of synapsids on Earth right now. The early non-mammalian synapsids could be divided into two different groups. We have the pelycosaurs and the therapsids. And within the therapsids, a group called the cynodonts are thought to have been the ancestors of all living mammals. So this little thing right here, that is the earliest mammalian ancestor to all of the mammals that are alive today. As with birds, a key characteristic of the mammals is being an endotherm, having that condition of homeothermy as opposed to ectothermy. And this increased metabolic rate, in order to maintain the internal body temperature, it required a lot of changes in the skeletal structure that improved food processing and walking. So later on, in the later synapsids, which had more evolved characteristics that are unique to mammals, more recognizable as mammalian, we have these evolved characteristics like cheek pouches that are used to hold food, and the heterodont teeth, which are specialized for chewing and mechanically breaking food down to ease digestion. Mammals evolved from the therapsids in the late Triassic period, and the earliest known mammal fossils are from about 205 million years ago, which had the animals looking something like this at that time. And what's notable about this animal in particular is that it has jaws that we consider to be transitional. It has features that are both reptilian, but also features that are quite uniquely mammalian. Looking at the different types of modern mammals that we have on Earth today, we have three different types. First up, we have the monotremes. These are represented with the echidna over here and the platypus, the duck-billed platypus over here. Now, monotremes are unique among mammals because they lay eggs rather than giving birth to live young. But what's special about their eggs is that the hard shells are kind of leathery, okay? They're not that distinct reptilian or bird-like egg that has a hard coating. They're pretty leathery on the outside. Next, we have the marsupials. You probably know most of these to be kangaroos and koalas, but they're also represented in the bandicoots and the Tasmanian devil. looking so cute over here. Most of our marsupials are within the continent of Australia, although there are some in South America as well. And then finally, the most widespread and numerous of the mammals are the eutherians, or the placental mammals. They have a vast diversity. This is everything from your elephant to your rabbit to your dog to bats and dolphins, whales, seals, and humans. Okay, what makes a placental mammal is the presence of a placenta. And that is what helps to facilitate growth and nutritional exchange between the fetus and the mother during embryonic development. We have about 4,000 species of placental mammals on Earth, with them falling into about 18 to 20 orders. So pretty diverse placental mammals on Earth, and they are adapted for practically any type of environment. We have them burrowing, flying, swimming, running, hunting, climbing, pretty much any mode of life you can think of, we have that represented in our placental mammals. So we were talking about humans and primates, so let's dig into that group in particular. So within our primates, of course, they are mammals, and there are specialized features about their physical body plan that separates the primates from other mammals. So most of the adaptations are to allow them to climb trees and have this arboreal way of life. And all of our primates are descendant from tree dwellers. So first of all, they have a rotating shoulder joint, which allows easy grasping and holding on to tree trunks. A lot of the primates have a big toe that is widely separated from the other toes, with the exception of the human primates. We do not have that feature. Most primates have thumbs that are sufficiently separated from fingers to allow easy grasping of branches. They also have this feature of stereoscopic vision, with two eyes generating two different images and being able to compile those two separate images in the brain. And of course, that ability to have stereoscopic vision would necessitate a big brain. And indeed, primates, for their size, have a large brain compared to other mammals. Now, we can break the primates down into two main groups. First, we have what we call the strepsirrhini, or the turn-nosed primates. These are our prosimians. You can recognize prosimians as lemurs or lorises or bush babies. So this is one type of group. The other type of primate is called the haplorhini, or the simple-nosed primates. These are also called dry-nosed primates. These represent both our old and new world monkeys, the apes, and the humans. And this is an image of the haplorhini. So delving within the apes, we again have two different groups within the apes. We have the lesser apes, which are the gibbons and the simiangs. And then we have the great apes, which includes the chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and the humans. And we're going to talk about in the next lecture the evolutionary trajectory of humans from the primate lineages and how they arose from the old world monkeys.